Peace, YouTube. This is Florun coming to you today for another topic of discussion. Hey, family. How have you been? It's the day before the circus. Many spectators, nothing to arrive. Anyway, it's election day. For those who are in the States, election day is tomorrow. So it should be very interesting, to say the least. But anyway, I came to you to discuss a new topic of discussion and a retraction for myself, which is interesting. The pictures that I just showed you previously are kin to the Pleiadians. I know that many of you have heard me speak on the Pleiadians before, the Pleiadians, and I spoke about having no imagery that was applicable to the images that are shown today of the so-called quote-unquote Pleiadians. But I've come into quite a bit of my own information, intel, and I have to retract the statement that my thought was that the Pleiadians did not exist. And why I formulated that is because there was nothing that indicated that these beings that, the images that were put out on the internet and so on, that were supposed to be reminiscent of the Pleiadians, were nothing that I could see, I could retrieve, or even relate to. But I must retract. There are those star beings that are actually Pleiadians, yes, and I must say that they are quite the opposition of everything that I might have surmised or thought in any practical sense of the term Pleiadians, or who they are at their core. The beings that I just showed you are the Aborigines from Australia and also New Zealand, and also the Cherokee tribe, which is here, and they also speak the Cherokees, the indigenous Cherokees, and also the Aborigines are reminiscent of what Pleiadians truly look like. That is their kin. They were the ones who were seeded here by the Pleiadians with their own genomes. So the Pleiadians seeded those indigenous beings here, and they are kin to the Pleiadians. And why it was probably so problematic for me to accept it is because there was no imagery, but obviously there was in New Zealand, and also in Australia, and also here in the Americas. They were actually just like the Dogon tribe is, kin to beings from Sirius B. The Pleiadians are very close knit with the Aboriginals and the Cherokee tribes, along with a host of other indigenous tribes from the Americas, and also from around, to my knowledge, around Mesoamerica, as well as Australia and New Zealand. The pictures you show are what the Pleiadians actually look like. They are highly melanated, and they have same features, either very thickish features on the face or very linear. There's a combination between the two, which is more reminiscent of the Cherokee with more linear features. And I'm sorry about my voice. I'm getting over a little bit of a light brush with a little bit of cold. I was with the little people for days, and their people, and little people always have the most interesting viruses that usually I usually kind of combat a little bit, but I have a little bit of it in me, so I apologize for my voice being a little rusty. So needless to say, I found out that the Pleiadians exist, and actually the Andromedans are the ones. Now this is something that I'm just coming into. The Andromedans were the ones who actually seeded the Pleiadians. Now this is another thing. There is some connection to the Andromedans and the Pleiadians. The Andromedans are older and more ancient than the Pleiadians, and they actually are being noted to be the ones that actually seeded the Pleiadians. Now, this is just, that's something, that's a sidebar. That's some information I've gotten. We've had some gentlemen who have records of the Aboriginals their actual archiving of their dealings with their family, the galactic Pleiadian family. They've come out with that, and that's what actually really made me see and get some intel on who the Pleiadians really are. They are kind, loving beings as far as it's concerned. There is no indication that they were associated with anything that had to do with the Nazis. That's where I have to retract that statement. The beings that were working with the Nazis, why I claimed that it was the Pleiadians, because the imagery of the Pleiadians were that of those beings who came to work with the Nazis. And come to find out, those beings who worked with the Nazis were not Pleiadians. They were actually beings from the future that came to work with Hitler. The association between the two had to do more with the imagery that was placed out there in public view of the same beings that came from the future and, did their dirt with Hitler and his Nazi crew. So I have to retract that, family. I hate to, I really hate to keep things up that are no longer part of my repertoire, my belief system, things that I've changed and evolved and learned new things, but I always like to leave old videos up because it shows my evolutionary process, my thoughts and patterns and, things that I've studied or come into knowing change based on, new information coming out or new intel from those. And actually the Cherokee and the Aborigine have made it known that this is part of their bloodline. That is who they come from. And it's so interesting that we are having right now this standoff in North Dakota with the Sioux tribe. The Sioux tribe in Standing Rock, North Dakota, with the pipeline going underneath the waterway outside of the perimeters of the reservation of the Sioux tribe, the Standing Rock Sioux tribe in North Dakota. I find it so interesting that this is happening at this particular time, right before, quote unquote, an election, and also before Thanksgiving, which we know is an atrocity that happens with Native Americans. And I don't even like to call them Native Americans. They were here. They were indigenous beings that existed here prior to the inception of Westerners who came here and did quite a bit of damage. And, it's interesting that what's going down in North Dakota is almost like a little bit of karmic debt because, I'm going to say something that's probably quite seedy and piloted, but to be honest, the people there who are part of that, quote unquote, the Sioux tribe, a lot of these indigenous, quote unquote, and I say quote unquote because a lot of the indigenous have been incepted. They look nothing like the indigenous that were originally here. They were, a lot of the bloodlines were watered down. Many of the women were raped. They looked nothing reminiscent of the originals. And also we have the issue of the $5 Indian inception, because back when there were so many different perks being given to indigenous Indians, those who were colonizers here decided that they wanted to get a piece of the pie. So they decided to go and pay $5 to take on the nationality of the indigenous, so that they would be able to get, land at a certain price, or to have free commerce, free trade and commerce in certain areas, what have you. So the coin term was $5 Indians. These were Europeans that paid $5 to take on the nationality of Indian tribes, different native tribes. And what's interesting about that, you look at a lot of the native tribes now, many of them are not indigenous to, looking reminiscent to the ancestors that were here. Christopher Columbus and a lot of the colonizers took pictures of the Native Americans. So for those who are getting very sensitive about this conversation, saying that I'm saying that the indigenous now are the lesser indigenous than what were, it is a fact. They looked, actually the natives look very reminiscent of myself. I've seen pictures of some of the things in Europe. A lot of times in Europe they haven't changed and doctored anything. The American archives, historical archives, have been all altered, many or most of them, so that the natives look more Asiatic and more European based. But to be honest, the first thing that Columbus said when he came to the Americas was like he thought he was in Africa because he saw a whole bunch of people who look reminiscent of Negroes. It's a fact. And it's interesting that they're having issues right now with the Sioux tribe in Standing Rock. But, on a metaphysical level, if you've been an inceptor, then you will be incepted on. Gather that again. If you've been an inceptor, meaning that you have taken on a nationality that was not yours, meaning that you say that you're Sioux and your ancestors were $5 Indians, meaning they paid for that nationality and maybe mixed with a couple of the indigenous, and you're holding a little bit, maybe 0.1% of that bloodline, but you're not. So what's happening now, this is my personal belief, because I see karma coming back around. I think that what's happening in Standing Rock is because there's no true indigenous people that are actually there from there, that are the true bloodlines, because the bloodlines have been killed off or so watered down that there's not much of it in there. The ancestors are not going to protect those who are not truly of that kin. And I know it's a little controversial to say that, but as someone who is also, I also had little people with someone of indigenous bloodline. I see the indigenous markers in my little people that are not reminiscent to where I come from. My family's from the Caribbean and also from Panama, but we have a different, structural, biological structural pattern within our genomes that you can see. And I noticed with my little people, with their indigenous from their father's bloodline, is that you can see certain qualities in their bloodline that is absolutely native. The teeth are much bigger. Also, the heads of the natives is different shaped. Their skin texture is a little different. The way that they're shaped, as far as arm length, is a little longer. There's a lot of qualities of an indigenous. And again, if you go and get blood tests, it wouldn't matter, because all the blood tests in ancestors and so on has been doctored. They've taken any markers out for the indigenous so that no one knows that they're indigenous, so that no one tries to collect any free, perks of being indigenous. But back in the days, it was easier to do so. So I just want to throw that in there. I have great respect for the indigenous tribes here in the Americas, and because I am from the Caribbean, I am mixed with those same people that went back and forth throughout the Americas, because we are part of those tribes. Many of the Carib, the Arawak, the Taino, which is like the Caribs in the Caribbean, were going back and forth into the Carolinas and Florida. So we're one and the same of the Americas. The indigenous bloodline that runs through me runs very much in the Americas, because we didn't have borders then, because we were just... So anyway, I'm sidebarring, but back to the Pleiadians. Come to find out, the Pleiadians exist, and they are connected to those bloodlines with the Cherokee and the Aboriginal. They've had close contact with them. The Aboriginal actually have certain practices and certain rituals that they do that is still reminiscent of their galactic Pleiadian families. And there are many who are still having contact and quote unquote abductions, but they don't consider it to be abductions. They consider it to be personal contact with their indigenous galactic ancestry with the Pleiadians. And again, those that are having contact with the Pleiadian are actually having real, tangible experiences. And I have to apologize for making a video saying that the Pleiadians were connected to the Nazis. They're absolutely not. It was another group that I just associated with based on the false visuals people are putting out. Pleiadians do not have blonde hair, blue eyed. They look like the Aboriginal people. The same pictures that you saw that I put up, that's what the Pleiadians look like. That's why I couldn't find them in history or in any walls or any markings or any denotion to them, because the people who are saying that these are Pleiadians, looking like something very opposition to the Aboriginals, those are not Pleiadians. Those are man-made, fabricated images that people are putting up, maybe to just be reminiscent of themselves, and that's cool, but it's false, because the Aboriginals and the Cherokee tribe, especially those two specifically, are connected directly to the Pleiadian bloodline. They look like the Pleiadians. So stop it. Stop it. There's been a lot of, changing and doctoring information, and it's really sad. And I'm not saying that the Pleiadians have not, Pleiadians don't come in different spectrums, but for them to have seeded those specific bloodlines that look like that remember, they are reminiscent of their galactic family, and to hide that, or to throw in some make-believe images based on their channeling, that's some sort of psychological nonsense. Sometimes these channelers are just pulling in things that are just imaginative images of themselves, and that's cool, but you can't put that out there, because what happens is that when people are actually looking for the connections that are real and tangible, they don't see and they don't find it. So I apologize to all the Pleiadian contactees and their star families for connecting anything negative to the Pleiadians, as far as I know. And I know Dr. Delbert Blair had a very different take on it as well. He knew about the Pleiadians, and he would talk about them in a very fond way. He was fond of the Pleiadians and felt like they were here for the humanity, and they were very helpful and committed to, especially the nature, the natural, restitution of our planet. They're very connected to a lot of the agricultural aspects of our planet. So that being said, I apologize to all Pleiadian people. I just, I've grown from then, and I'm retracting the statement that they were connected to the Nazis. They're absolutely not. They're actually wonderful, loving, light beings that are here for humanity. So that being said, I'm sorry, I'm coughing. I'm going to shut this video down. I'm going to make another video today based on some other information. But if anyone has anything about the Pleiadians that you'd like to share, feel free, join in down there. I am in no way making this into something more than what it is. I'm bringing up a connection between the actual bloodlines of the Pleiadians, which is the Aboriginal people of New Zealand and Australia, which is a fact. They actually have records of the Pleiadians. That's why I've changed my statements, because their information is on point, and it's tangible, and it's older than anything that any information. It predates any information that we could have gotten tangible here in the States. They're on point with that, and the Cherokee have talked about that in many of their stories and tales and folklores. They've spoken about the Pleiadians. So because of that, I've had to rethink and relook and reinvestigate on the connection of the Pleiadians, and also connect the dots that these are the same beings that are connected to those particular indigenous tribes. Anyway, I love you. I hope it's well, and hopefully the election, we'll see what goes down tomorrow. All right, peace and love. Peace.